Engineer Jake Sullivan had been maintaining atmospheric processors on Kepler 438b for 18 months, which was long enough to understand that routine maintenance on a contested colony world usually involved either equipment that had been sabotaged for political reasons or technical problems that could accidentally restart interstellar wars if handled incorrectly. The emergency alert that woke him at 300 local time suggested today would involve both. "Sullivan to Engineering Central," he said into his comm unit while pulling on his work gear. "I'm showing a cascade failure in Atmospheric Processor 7. That's the one handling the Zelani residential sector, right?" "Confirmed," came the response from Night Shift Supervisor Martinez, her voice carrying the kind of tension that suggested this wasn't a simple mechanical problem. "We've got families evacuating from 6 residential blocks, and the Zelani technical team is requesting immediate human engineering consultation." Requesting consultation, or demanding it while threatening to declare the maintenance treaty void if we don't fix their air supply immediately. The former, thankfully, though Elder Thainver did mention something about consequences for interspecies cooperation if we can't restore atmospheric stability before the morning shift change. Jake grabbed his emergency toolkit and headed for the transport pad, navigating through the colony's carefully designed layout that accommodated both human rectangular construction preferences and Zelani crystalline architectural principles. The result looked like someone had tried to build a city using blueprints from 2 different civilizations, which was exactly what had happened. Atmospheric Processor 7 was a marvel of joint engineering, human technology providing robust mechanical systems, while Zelani crystalline matrices added efficiency improvements that human science couldn't fully explain but couldn't argue with the results. When it worked properly, the hybrid system could process atmospheric chemistry for both species at 93% efficiency. When it failed, it tended to do so in ways that defied troubleshooting protocols from either civilization. "The cascade started in the primary harmonic resonance chamber," explained Kesslin, the Zelani technical specialist whose crystalline implants allowed direct interface with their technology. "Human mechanical systems are functioning within normal parameters, but something is disrupting the frequency modulation that optimizes efficiency." Jake activated his diagnostic equipment, noting readings that suggested equipment malfunction rather than sabotage. "The frequency disruption, is it random or does it follow a pattern?" "Pattern suggests external interference, but our sensors detect no hostile activity." "External interference," Jake repeated, scanning the facility for anomalies. "Something's broadcasting on frequencies that interfere with your crystalline matrices, but it's not showing up as deliberate jamming." They worked through the technical troubleshooting with the kind of professional cooperation that had developed between human and Zelani engineering teams over months of shared infrastructure maintenance. The problem turned out to be more complex than equipment failure. Someone had modified the atmospheric processor's harmonic frequencies in ways that wouldn't show up on standard diagnostics, but would gradually degrade efficiency until system failure became inevitable. "This is sabotage," Jake announced after isolating the frequency modifications. "But it's subtle sabotage, designed to look like normal wear rather than deliberate interference." "Can you restore proper function?" "I can restore it, but it'll take several hours to recalibrate all the harmonic matrices. Your people will need to evacuate the residential sectors until we can guarantee stable atmospheric processing." The evacuation proceeded with the kind of efficient coordination that both species had developed during the emergency drills that had become routine since the peace treaty. But during the complex process of moving families from affected residential areas to temporary housing, a young Zelani child became separated from her group. Jake found her hiding in one of the maintenance alcoves, clearly frightened by the emergency sirens and evacuation chaos. She appeared to be perhaps 8 years old in human terms, with the pointed ears and faint luminescence that marked her as Zelani, but her distress was universal enough that species barriers seemed irrelevant. "Hey there," Jake said gently, activating his universal translator and hoping it would function better than usual. "I'm Jake. Are you lost?" She looked up at him with violet eyes that seemed too old for her apparent age. "I cannot find my guardians," the evacuation became, confused. "Evacuation confusion happens to the best of us. What's your name?" "I am called Lyra," she replied, her accent making standard galactic sound musical. "Are you the engineer who repairs the air?" "That's me. Professional air fixer and emergency babysitter, apparently." Jake knelt down to her level, noting that she seemed calmer now that someone was paying attention to her. "Do you know where your guardians were supposed to meet you?" "The central gathering area, but there were so many people, and the sounds were very loud." Lyra studied his face with the kind of intensity that suggested she was evaluating whether he could be trusted. "Are you going to take me to them?" "That's the plan. Though first, I need to make sure the atmospheric processors are working properly so everyone can go home safely. Would you like to help me fix the air?" Her face lit up with genuine excitement. "I can help repair the machines." "Well, you can keep me company while I work, and maybe you can tell me if the harmonic frequencies sound right to Zelani hearing. Your people are much better at detecting frequency problems than we are." The repair work took the better part of 6 hours, during which Jake discovered that Lyra was remarkably intelligent and curious about human engineering techniques. She asked thoughtful questions about mechanical systems, offered observations about harmonic resonance that actually helped optimize the repairs, and taught him basic Zelani frequency patterns that improved the integration between human and Zelani technologies. "You have skilled hands for machine working," Lyra said, as Jake completed the final calibrations. "Do all humans learn such repair techniques?" "Most of us learn some basic engineering, but I specialized in atmospheric systems because I like making sure people can breathe safely." Jake checked his readings, confirming that the sabotaged frequencies had been corrected and efficiency was back to normal parameters. "Speaking of which, we should probably get you back to your guardians. They're likely worried sick about you." "They worry often," Lyra said matter-of-factly. "It is difficult for them to balance protection with allowing me to experience normal activities." Jake noted the oddly formal way she spoke about her guardians, but attributed it to cultural differences and the universal translator's tendency to make casual conversation sound like diplomatic correspondence. The family reunification process took 3 days to coordinate through proper diplomatic channels, during which time Lyra stayed in the guest quarters of the human residential sector under Jake's informal supervision. He found himself enjoying her company more than he'd expected. She was intelligent, curious, and had a remarkable ability to bridge the gap between human and Zelani technical approaches. "Jake," Lyra said on their final evening together, "when I return to my guardians, will I be able to visit you again?" "That depends on what your guardians think about interspecies friendships," Jake replied carefully. "But I hope so. You've been excellent company, and you've taught me more about Zelani engineering than 6 months of technical manuals. I have enjoyed learning about human repair methods. Perhaps we can continue such exchanges in the future." As Jake prepared for the reunification ceremony the next day, he reflected that caring for Lyra had been one of the more rewarding experiences of his colonial assignment. She was bright, curious, and had a remarkable talent for making complex technical problems seem manageable through simple observation and logical thinking. He had no way of knowing that his informal supervision of a lost child was about to be reinterpreted as something far more significant under Zelani royal law, or that the guardians he was about to meet included the Queen of the Zelani Confederation and a full diplomatic entourage, whose presence suggested that Lyra's disappearance had been a matter of interstellar political importance. Sometimes the most significant relationships begin with simple acts of kindness, and Jake Sullivan had just unknowingly positioned himself at the center of a diplomatic situation that would reshape his understanding of family, responsibility, and the unexpected ways that caring for others can change the entire course of your life. The family reunification ceremony was scheduled to take place in the colony's central diplomatic complex, a building designed to accommodate formal proceedings between species whose architectural preferences had evolved on completely different worlds. Jake arrived expecting a simple handover, return Lyra to her worried parents, receive polite thanks, and get back to maintaining atmospheric processors that had mysteriously stopped being sabotaged the moment news of Lyra's rescue became public knowledge. Instead, he found himself facing what appeared to be a full diplomatic entourage. "Mr. Sullivan," announced Administrator Chen, the human colonial authority, her voice carrying the kind of formal precision usually reserved for interstellar incidents. "May I present Queen Seraphine Kethalani of the Zelani Confederation, along with the royal diplomatic staff." Jake felt the bottom drop out of his universe as he processed the information. Queen Seraphine stood before him with the kind of regal bearing that made formal military protocol look casual, her ceremonial robe seeming to capture and reflect light in patterns that hurt his eyes if he stared too long. Behind her, a group of Zelani officials whose elaborate rank insignia suggested they were important enough to start wars if accidentally insulted. "Your Majesty," Jake said, attempting what he hoped was an appropriate bow while trying not to think about the fact that he'd been teaching the heir to an alien throne how to optimize atmospheric processor efficiency. "I hope Princess Lyra is. I mean Lyra. I mean your daughter." "Princess Lyra is quite well, thanks to your care," Queen Seraphine replied, her voice carrying harmonics that made the universal translator hum with effort. "We are grateful for your protection during the emergency evacuation. Just doing my job, Your Majesty. Anyone would have." His words were cut off by a familiar voice calling his name with unmistakable joy. "Father." Jake turned to see Lyra breaking away from her position beside the Queen, running toward him with obvious excitement and throwing her arms around him in a gesture of pure affection and trust. "Father, I knew you would come to the ceremony. I told Mother about all the things you taught me about machine repair and frequency optimization." The silence that followed felt heavy enough to collapse nearby solar systems. Jake looked down at Lyra, who was beaming up at him with complete happiness, then at Queen Seraphine, whose royal composure had frozen into an expression of absolute shock. The assembled diplomatic staff had gone completely still, as if someone had just activated a temporal stasis field around everyone except Lyra herself. "Lyra," Jake said carefully, "I think there might be some confusion about—" "No confusion," interrupted Elder Thainver, stepping forward with the expression of someone who had just witnessed either a miracle or a catastrophe. "Princess Lyra has made the Kethani Velthar, the father-claiming declaration. According to ancient law, when a royal heir publicly claims someone as father, it creates an automatic guardian-consort bond." "Guardian consort, what now?" Jake looked around the diplomatic complex, noting that every Zelani official was staring at him with expressions ranging from fascination to barely controlled panic. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Children often form attachments to their rescuers, and the translation protocols might be—" "No misunderstanding," Queen Seraphine said quietly, her voice carrying undertones that Jake's increasingly sensitive ears recognized as carefully controlled shock. "The Kethani Velthar is not a casual declaration. When spoken by royal blood in the presence of witnesses, it creates binding legal obligations that cannot be easily dissolved." Administrator Chen stepped forward with the expression of someone whose worst diplomatic nightmares were materializing in real time. "Your Majesty, perhaps we could discuss the legal implications in private consultation before." "The implications are clear," Elder Thainver said firmly. "Mr. Sullivan is now bound as guardian consort to Princess Lyra under ancient law. The bond grants shared authority over her welfare, education, and certain aspects of royal prerogative. Certain aspects? Jake asked, though he suspected he really didn't want to know the answer. Command protocols, intelligence access, and diplomatic authority sufficient to influence succession decisions. Queen Seraphine's voice remained controlled, but Jake caught something underneath that might have been either terror or hope. The guardian consort bond is designed to ensure that anyone granted parental authority over royal heirs becomes fully invested in protecting the realm's interests. Jake looked down at Lyra, who was still holding on to him with obvious contentment, apparently oblivious to the political crisis she just created. "Princess, are you sure you want to call me father? We only knew each other for a few days, and you protected me when I was frightened," Lyra said with the kind of simple logic that made diplomatic complexity seem irrelevant. "You taught me useful skills and answered my questions with patience. You shared your food and made sure I was safe. These are the actions of a father. But your actual parents. My mother is queen, and my father was a great warrior who died before I was born," Lyra explained matter-of-factly. "But you are the first person who has cared for me as a person rather than as a princess. That makes you my chosen father." Jake felt the weight of royal protocol settling around him like gravity from a much larger planet. "Your Majesty, I'm deeply honored by Princess Lyra's choice, but I'm just an engineer. I'm not qualified for any sort of royal responsibility or diplomatic authority. The qualifications are character and choice, not training or status," Queen Seraphine replied, though her expression suggested she was still processing the implications of her daughter's declaration. "Princess Lyra has made her choice. The question now is whether you accept the responsibilities that come with her trust. And if I don't, then the bond dissolves after one lunar cycle. Princess Lyra learns that the adults in her life can be trusted only conditionally, and—" Queen Seraphine paused, exchanging glances with Elder Thainver. "And certain intelligence regarding threats to both our peoples remains inaccessible." Intelligence. The guardian consort bond grants access to classified information that requires both royal authority and outside verification to unlock, Elder Thainver explained. "Information that may be crucial to preventing the resumption of hostilities between our species." Jake looked around the diplomatic complex at faces representing two civilizations whose peace treaty was apparently more fragile than he'd realized. Princess Lyra continued to hold on to him with the kind of trust that made complex political calculations seem both irrelevant and absolutely essential. "Your Majesty," he said finally, "if I accept this guardian consort bond, what exactly would that involve in practical terms?" "Legal responsibility for Princess Lyra's welfare and education, shared authority over certain royal decisions, and access to intelligence networks that could determine whether our peoples remain at peace or slide back into conflict." Queen Seraphine's voice carried the weight of generations of royal responsibility. "It is not a choice to be made lightly. And if Princess Lyra had chosen someone else, someone more qualified, more appropriate, more politically suitable—" "She did not choose someone else," Queen Seraphine said simply. "She chose you. The question is whether you choose her in return." Jake looked down at Lyra, seeing hope and trust and the kind of unconditional affection that made his chest tighten with emotions he wasn't prepared to handle. Around them, the assembled diplomats waited for a decision that would apparently determine not just the future of one small girl, but the stability of peace between two civilizations. "Princess Lyra," he said gently, "are you absolutely sure about this? Because once I say yes, we're both committed to something that's going to change everything." "I am certain," she replied without hesitation. "You are my chosen father, and I am your chosen daughter. Everything else is just details for the adults to arrange." Jake closed his eyes, feeling the weight of decision that would reshape his understanding of family, responsibility, and the unexpected ways that loving someone could become a matter of interstellar political importance. When he opened them, Queen Seraphine was watching him with an expression that mixed maternal hope with royal pragmatism, while Princess Lyra looked up at him with complete confidence that he would make the right choice. "Your Majesty," Jake said quietly, "I guess we need to figure out how this guardian consort thing works, because I really don't want to disappoint your daughter." The relief that crossed Queen Seraphine's face was immediately replaced by the kind of determined expression that suggested Jake had just volunteered for either the most important responsibility of his life or the most elaborate form of political suicide ever devised. Possibly both. The secure briefing chamber beneath the diplomatic complex had been designed for discussing classified information that could destabilize interstellar relations, which turned out to be remarkably appropriate for conversations about accidentally becoming guardian consort to alien royalty, while corporate conspiracies threatened to restart wars that had supposedly ended 2 years ago. "Mr. Sullivan," Administrator Chen began, consulting holographic displays that outlined the implications of the guardian consort bond. "Your new legal status grants you shared authority over Princess Lyra's welfare, education, and certain aspects of royal succession that our legal team is still trying to understand." Jake sat beside Queen Seraphine at the briefing table, trying to process information that made atmospheric processor maintenance seem like a relaxing hobby. "When you say shared authority, are we talking about input on her education, or actual decision-making power that could affect interstellar politics?" "The latter," Elder Thainver replied grimly. "The guardian consort bond creates automatic access to royal command protocols and classified intelligence networks. Your biometric signature is now paired with Princess Lyra's in systems that control evacuation routes, defensive positions, and diplomatic communications. So essentially, I've gone from being an engineer responsible for maintaining air quality to being someone with the authority to influence the outcome of peace negotiations." "Exactly. Which is why," Queen Seraphine continued, "certain factions from both species are very interested in either exploiting or eliminating this development." The holographic displays shifted to show intelligence reports that painted a picture Jake really didn't want to see. Human corporate entities were mobilizing to capitalize on potential access to Zelani intelligence, while Zelani traditionalists were demanding that the guardian consort bond be dissolved rather than allow human contamination of royal bloodlines. "There's more," Administrator Chen said reluctantly. "Princess Lyra's presence on the colony wasn't accidental. She was being hidden here while investigations proceeded into systematic sabotage of peace negotiations." "The atmospheric processor sabotage that brought us together," Jake said, pieces clicking together in his mind. "Someone wanted to create an emergency that would expose her location." Queen Seraphine activated another display, showing communication logs that revealed coordination between human defense contractors and Zelani military industrialists. "For the past year, we've been tracking evidence of conspiracy between parties from both species who profit from maintaining conflict rather than achieving lasting peace. They've been sabotaging infrastructure, manipulating resource shortages, and creating artificial crises to justify increased military spending while publicly supporting diplomatic solutions," Elder Thainver added. "The guardian consort bond grants access to classified files that could expose the entire network, but only if both human and Zelani authorization codes are used simultaneously," Queen Seraphine explained. "My access alone isn't sufficient, and neither would be any standard human clearance. The combination of royal authority and guardian consort status creates unique access that the conspirators can't easily duplicate or suppress." A soft chime indicated incoming priority communications. General Morrison's image materialized in the briefing chamber, his expression suggesting he was dealing with political pressures that made military command seem straightforward. "Sullivan, the situation here is deteriorating rapidly. Human corporate representatives are claiming that your guardian consort bond constitutes unauthorized access to alien state secrets. They're demanding your immediate recall and court-martial. On what grounds, General? Exceeding authority, accepting foreign political position, and potentially compromising human strategic interests. Morrison's tone suggested he found the charges as ridiculous as Jake did. Of course, the same corporations making these accusations have been lobbying for unrestricted access to Zelani technology for the past 3 years. So they're upset that I might have gained access they've been trying to buy, Jake said, understanding the political dynamics. They're upset that you might use that access for humanitarian purposes rather than profit maximization. Meanwhile, Princess Lyra's safety has become a matter of interstellar security concern. Queen Seraphine leaned forward. Assassination teams from multiple factions are moving toward the colony. Corporate security, Zelani separatists, and unidentified parties who appear to be working for off-world interests. How long do we have? Jake asked, his engineering training automatically shifting to crisis management mode. Perhaps 12 hours before they can coordinate a direct assault on the diplomatic complex, Elder Thainver replied. But the real deadline is the formal ceremony that would legitimize the guardian consort bond. Without proper ritual confirmation, the legal authorities remain ambiguous. And with formal confirmation, you gain permanent legal standing as Princess Lyra's guardian and shared access to the intelligence networks needed to expose the conspiracy, Queen Seraphine explained. But you also become a permanent target for elimination by forces that profit from keeping our peoples in conflict. Jake looked around the briefing chamber at the assembled faces, seeing determination mixed with the kind of professional concern that came with making decisions where failure meant not just personal consequences, but renewed warfare between civilizations. Your Majesty, he said quietly, I need to ask you something directly. When Princess Lyra called me father, did she understand the political implications? She understood that she was choosing someone to trust with her welfare and protection, Queen Seraphine replied. The broader political implications. No, she is too young to fully comprehend those, but her choice was genuine, based on her evaluation of your character during the time you cared for her. And you, what do you think of her choice? Queen Seraphine studied his face with the same intensity Jake had noticed in Princess Lyra. I think my daughter has inherited the royal ability to recognize trustworthiness in others. You could have exploited your position during the emergency, used her gratitude for personal gain, or sought to impress royal authority. Instead, you treated her as a child who needed care and Jake looked at the intelligence displays showing the scope of the conspiracy, the evidence that could only be accessed through combined authorization codes, and Princess Lyra's image in the secured quarters, where she was being protected by the best security both species could provide. Queen Seraphine, he said finally, if I accept formal guardian consort status, what exactly would that mean for Princess Lyra? Not the political implications, but the personal ones. It would mean she gains a father who chose to accept responsibility for her welfare, someone whose legal obligation to protect her supersedes all other considerations. Queen Seraphine's voice carried the weight of royal authority tempered by maternal hope. It would mean that someone cares about her as a person rather than as a political asset. And for you, it would mean trusting my daughter's safety to someone I barely know, whose species I was raised to see as potential enemies, whose presence in royal succession challenges every traditional protocol. She paused. It would also mean gaining an ally whose access to human systems could help expose the forces that have been manipulating both our peoples. Jake closed his eyes, feeling the weight of decision that would determine not just his relationship with a small girl who had called him father, but the possibility of exposing conspiracy that threatened the survival of peace between two civilizations. Your Majesty, he said, opening his eyes, I think it's time to figure out how Zelani guardian consort ceremonies work, because Princess Lyra deserves to have someone who will put her welfare above political convenience. Even if that someone is a human engineer with no training in royal protocol. Especially if that someone is a human engineer with no training in royal protocol. Maybe what Princess Lyra needs isn't someone who understands politics, but someone who understands that children should be protected regardless of the complications that creates for adults. As the chamber's security systems prepared for the most important ceremony of his life, Jake reflected that his engineering career had taught him to build systems that keep people safe. But the guardian consort bond was about to teach him to build relationships that keep entire civilizations safe. He was beginning to suspect that this would either be the most important construction project of his career, or the most spectacular engineering failure in diplomatic history. The guardian consort ceremony took place in the colony's protected diplomatic sanctuary, a chamber designed to honor the sacred traditions of multiple species, while maintaining the kind of security that could withstand small-scale military assault. Jake stood before the ancient Zelani bonding altar, while explosive charges echoed through the complex's outer defenses, trying to focus on sacred vows rather than the tactical situation that was deteriorating by the minute. "Are you ready for this?" Queen Seraphine asked, her voice carrying the formal harmonics required for royal ceremonies, while her eyes reflected the very personal stakes of trusting her daughter's future to someone she'd met 3 days ago. "I'm about as ready as someone can be for becoming the legal guardian of alien royalty, while corporate assassination teams try to prevent me from accessing classified intelligence that could expose interstellar conspiracy," Jake replied, attempting to inject some humor into a situation that felt like standing in the middle of a storm while trying to perform surgery. "Though I should probably mention that my experience with parenting is mostly limited to keeping atmospheric processors running and making sure nobody dies from oxygen deprivation." "The guardian consort bond is not about experience," Elder Thainver assured him, activating the crystalline apparatus that would formalize their legal relationship. "It is about commitment to protection, growth, and the kind of love that puts another's welfare above your own convenience. Though you should know," Queen Seraphine said quietly, "that once the bond is formalized, you'll have legal authority to make decisions about Princess Lyra's education, safety, and future that will affect not just her personal development, but succession planning for the entire Zelani Confederation." "No pressure at all," Jake said, then looked toward the secure quarters where Princess Lyra was waiting under heavy guard. "Is she aware of what's happening out here?" "She knows that you're participating in a ceremony that will make your father-daughter relationship official under Zelani law," Queen Seraphine replied. "The broader implications. We felt it best to focus on the personal rather than the political aspects." "Smart choice, though I have to ask, are you sure about this? I mean really sure. Because once I say these vows, you're trusting your daughter and your kingdom's future to a human who still can't pronounce half the ceremonial titles correctly." "I am certain," Queen Seraphine said without hesitation. "Princess Lyra chose you based on character rather than credentials. Perhaps it's time for royal protocol to trust a child's judgment over political convention." Elder Thainver began the ceremonial incantations, his voice harmonizing with crystalline resonance fields that made the chamber's walls pulse with inner light. "Do you, Queen Seraphine Kethalani, grant guardian consort authority to Jake Sullivan, knowing that this choice will bind him to your daughter's welfare across all challenges to come?" "I do," Queen Seraphine said, her voice steady despite the sounds of combat growing closer. "And I promise to honor his decisions regarding Princess Lyra's welfare, to support his authority in matters of her protection and education, and to never use their bond for political advantage that would compromise her happiness or safety." "And do you, Jake Sullivan, accept the bond of guardian consort with Princess Lyra Kethalani, understanding that you accept not just parental responsibility, but authority over royal succession that could affect the fate of entire civilizations. Jake looked toward the secure quarters where Princess Lyra waited, remembering her excitement about learning atmospheric processor maintenance, her thoughtful questions about human engineering techniques, and the way she had trusted him completely during the evacuation emergency. "I do," he said, his voice carrying across the chamber despite the distant explosions. "And I promise to put Princess Lyra's welfare above political convenience, to protect her right to be a child as well as a princess, and to never use our bond to advance my own interests at the expense of her happiness or the peace between our peoples." The chamber filled with harmonics as quantum resonance fields activated, creating legal bonds that transcended species barriers. Jake felt something shift in his consciousness, not invasive, but like gaining access to knowledge he hadn't known existed. Information flowed through the connection. Zelani cultural traditions, royal protocols, and most importantly, access to the classified intelligence networks that had been waiting for exactly this kind of authorization. "Jake," Queen Seraphine whispered, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated directly in his enhanced awareness. "Can you access what I'm accessing?" Through their shared connection to the royal intelligence networks, he could see files that documented years of systematic manipulation. Communication logs between human defense contractors and Zelani military industrialists. Financial records showing coordinated sabotage of infrastructure projects designed to create artificial crises. Operational plans for manufacturing incidents that would derail peace negotiations at crucial moments. The Meridian Syndicate has been working with the Kethari Warhawks to ensure that every peace initiative fails just before completion, Jake said, processing information at speeds that his engineering training had never prepared him for. They've been creating the emergencies, then profiting from selling solutions to problems they caused. While refugees die waiting for assistance that could be provided immediately if the artificial shortages were eliminated, Queen Seraphine added through their shared awareness. But now we have the evidence and the authority to act on it. The ceremony's completion triggered automatic access protocols throughout both civilizations' intelligence networks. Ancient systems activated that had been waiting for the specific combination of royal authority and human engineering clearance, providing alternative resource distribution networks that bypassed corporate-controlled supply chains. "Warning," announced the chamber's AI, speaking in harmonics that predated human spaceflight. "Hostile breach detected in outer defensive perimeter. Guardian consort protocols now active." Through their shared intelligence access, Jake and Queen Seraphine coordinated responses that neither species could have managed alone. Jake's engineering expertise identified vulnerabilities in the attacking force's equipment, while Queen Seraphine's royal authority activated defensive systems that had been hidden throughout the colony's infrastructure. "They're not just trying to kill us," Jake realized as he monitored the tactical situation. "They're trying to destroy the evidence before we can broadcast it." "Then we broadcast it now," Queen Seraphine replied, using their combined authority to transmit the complete conspiracy files to every major news network, government oversight committee, and military command structure in both civilizations simultaneously. The information spread faster than any suppression effort could contain it, revealing systematic manipulation to publics who had believed their conflicts were based on genuine resource scarcity and territorial disputes. The response was immediate and overwhelming. On both sides, military commanders began arresting the conspirators identified in the intelligence files, while corporate assets were frozen pending investigation. As the defensive systems successfully repelled the assault and the immediate danger passed, Jake found himself in the strange position of being both a father and a guardian consort to alien royalty, with access to intelligence networks that could reshape the relationship between two civilizations. "Father," Princess Lyra emerged from the secure quarters, running toward him with obvious joy and throwing her arms around him in a gesture that felt both completely natural and politically significant, beyond anything he'd ever experienced. Did the ceremony work? Are you officially my father now? According to Zelani law and several very complex legal documents, yes, Jake replied, hugging her back while trying to process the fact that his parental responsibilities now included considerations of interstellar diplomacy. Though I should probably warn you that being my daughter might involve some unusual educational experiences. Unusual how? Well, for starters, your homework might occasionally include learning about atmospheric processor maintenance, and family dinners could involve discussions of interspecies engineering cooperation. That sounds much more interesting than traditional royal education, Princess Lyra said happily. Can you teach me about human mechanical systems? I can teach you anything you want to learn, provided your mother agrees it's appropriate for future queens to understand how to fix essential infrastructure. Queen Seraphine approached them with an expression that mixed maternal relief with royal satisfaction. I believe Princess Lyra's education should include practical skills alongside traditional diplomatic training. After all, a ruler who understands how things actually work is better equipped to make decisions that serve her people's needs. 6 months later, Guardian Consort Engineer Jake Sullivan-Kethalani stood on the observation deck of the Zelani diplomatic vessel Harmony's Light, reviewing refugee infrastructure reports while his daughter worked on homework that included both royal protocol studies and basic atmospheric engineering principles. The hyphenated name had been Princess Lyra's suggestion, and Jake had discovered that arguing with a determined 8-year-old about family naming conventions was significantly more challenging than negotiating with corporate executives. The Guardian Consort bond had evolved beyond its original purpose, becoming less about shared intelligence access and more about shared responsibility for raising a child who would someday need to lead a civilization that valued both tradition and innovation. Princess Lyra's education now included human engineering principles alongside Zelani diplomatic traditions, preparing her for a future where cooperation between species was the foundation of prosperity rather than an exception to conflict. Any regrets? Queen Seraphine asked, joining them at the viewport where stars wheeled in patterns that seemed more peaceful now that artificial shortages and manufactured crises were no longer driving their peoples toward conflict. Well, Jake said thoughtfully, I do miss the simplicity of maintaining atmospheric processors, where the worst-case scenario was equipment failure rather than interstellar incident. There's something appealingly straightforward about problems that can be solved with proper calibration and routine maintenance, as opposed to raising a princess whose homework includes both diplomatic protocol and mechanical engineering, while managing intelligence networks that span multiple star systems and trying not to accidentally cause diplomatic incidents when I mispronounce ceremonial titles. The titles are getting much better, Princess Lyra pointed out helpfully. You only accidentally declared war on the Centauri delegation once last month, and that was because their ceremonial greeting sounds exactly like a human engineering complaint about faulty atmospheric regulation. See, progress. Though I still think interstellar diplomacy would be much easier if everyone just used standard engineering terminology. Actually, Queen Seraphine said with a smile that had become much more frequent since the conspiracy's exposure eliminated the constant threat of renewed warfare. Princess Lyra's suggestion of incorporating technical precision into diplomatic language has been quite well received by other species. Apparently, several governments are considering requiring their diplomats to learn basic engineering principles to improve the clarity of international agreements. Engineering diplomacy, I like it. Much more precise than the traditional approach of arguing about the meaning of ceremonial phrases, while hoping nobody accidentally starts a war. Father, Princess Lyra said, looking up from her homework with the kind of expression that usually preceded requests for complicated explanations. When I become queen, can we make it a law that all important infrastructure has to be designed so that different species can maintain it together? That depends on whether such cooperation is technically feasible and politically practical, Jake replied, falling back on the careful language he'd learned during months of balancing engineering reality with diplomatic necessity. But you think it's a good idea? I think, Jake said, pulling both his daughter and Queen Seraphine closer as the Harmony's light jumped to hyperspace, carrying them toward their next infrastructure coordination mission, that the most important engineering projects are the ones that bring people together instead of keeping them apart. But even when bringing them together is much more complicated than keeping them apart. Especially then, the best engineering solutions are usually the most complex ones, because they have to account for more variables and serve more people's needs. As they traveled through hyperspace toward colonies where human and Zelani families were learning to share resources instead of competing for them, Jake reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. He'd started as an engineer trained to maintain systems that kept people alive, but the guardian-consort bond had taught him to build relationships that kept entire civilizations thriving. The conspiracy they'd exposed had been completely dismantled, its architects facing justice, while the artificial shortages they'd maintained gave way to genuine cooperation. Infrastructure projects now operated as joint ventures, using combined human and Zelani expertise to create systems that neither species could have built alone. There's something I should tell you both, Queen Seraphine said, her voice carrying the formal tone she used for important announcements. What is it, Mother? Princess Lyra asked, looking up from homework problems that involved calculating atmospheric processing requirements for mixed-species colonies. The Royal Council has approved Princess Lyra's suggestion that guardian-consort bonds should be available to other families who want to formalize interspecies adoption relationships. Several human Zelani couples have requested permission to use the same legal framework for their own children. Jake considered this development, so we accidentally created a new form of interspecies family law. You created a precedent that allows love to transcend species barriers in legally recognized ways, Queen Seraphine corrected, which, according to the sociologists, is exactly what both our civilizations needed to move beyond the artificial divisions that the conspiracy had been exploiting. No pressure about setting good examples for interstellar family relationships, Jake said with a grin. Though I have to say, if we're going to be the model for human Zelani parenting, we'd better make sure we're doing it right. I think, Princess Lyra said seriously, that we're doing it exactly right. You're teaching me useful skills, Mother is teaching me important traditions, and together